Nicholas Shakespeare is travelling, I think. We hope that he will come to the travel session. Travel is arguably the oldest form of literature. It precedes the novel by 3,000 years. If you think of man's earliest writings, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the wanderings of Gilgamesh and Utnapishtim through Mesopotamia, the wanderings of the patriarchs of the Old Testament, the wanderings of the Pandava brothers in the Mahabharata, man turns to travel as a metaphor, as a vehicle for narrative, long before any other form of literature except epic poetry. Travel writing has taken many forms over many hundreds of years, from the writings of early antiquity, Tacitus, going off to Scotland, the wanderings of medieval Arab geographers like Ibn Battuta and Ibn Jubayr, Marco Polo from Europe. And then in the colonial period, it becomes an outrider of the colonial project with figures like Alexander Burns, writing travel books through Central Asia at the same time as he's an acting British intelligence officer. Other travel writers like Mungo Park laying the groundwork for colonialism in their writing. And then following that with the rise of people like Pico, the post-colonial writers, Amitav Ghosh, Vikram Seth, and the Empire writing back more recently. So we have on this panel today, as every year, a diverse range of writers from Australia, Palestine, England, Scotland. Pico is sort of indefinable, somewhere between Oxford, Japan, and India. Redmond, who's done a bunk from Britain and now living in Holland. Yes. What we do always in this session is we go from left to right, so Robert will begin, we'll end with Redmond, and each of them has got about 5-6 minutes to introduce a passage and then read it. So over to Robert, go for it.
Goodness me, that was very sudden. Thank you very much. Well, for me, the great model is Odysseus, I suppose. Travel and writing about travel is about going home. An odyssey is not wandering. An odyssey is not getting on a camel and tripping around Australia. An odyssey is going home. And at home is a dog. And the dog's name is Argos. Enid Blyton took up the theme. There was always a dog in any kind of adventure, any kind of travel adventure. And it's the same for me. So when I write, I'm writing about a sort of a ritual, really. And it's a going home ritual. Because unless you are happy at home, you do not travel well. I will say it again. Unless you are happy at home, unless home is big, you will not travel well, in my humble opinion. And so when I travel, I often look for a shrine. I don't really mean a holy place exactly, but I'll read you a little bit. What precisely, in these days of disenchantment, is a shrine? It's whatever makes you gasp with wonder, the place where you are ravished with a transfiguring astonishment. Ravishment, you see, is the key to travel, to being alive. For me, travel is always, at some level, an erotic experience, by which I do not mean sexual, I mean erotic. Think about it. The place where you are ravished. Only the French would come up with a word like ravished. The French are ravished just to meet you. Je suis ravi, they say. A Dane would never say that. With a transfiguring astonishment. And you deserve to gasp with wonder at least once every time you leave home. It's wherever you find the great mystery, the mysterium tremendum et fascinans, as Horace might have put it, the unpolluted place. For example, for me, 2 or 3 years ago, it was, quite unexpectedly, the Rohtang Pass in the far north of India. 13,000 feet up on an Indian branch of the old Silk Road, halfway to
heaven it was. Prayer flags fluttering, eerily empty, despite the pilgrims in the distance, gaily coloured, trekking towards a sacred lake, every puddle up there in the Rotang Pass being sacred. I felt I was straddling a frontier. Behind and below me was India. Ahead of me, little Tibet, as they call it, mighty walls of snow and rock, an abyss at my feet full of wind and silence you can actually listen to. Frightening, really, sublime, engulfing. Nothingness and infinite wakefulness all at once. Here at last, after weeks on the road, home finally fell away. Home fell away. That's what you want to happen. And I was renewed, reborn, a Shintoist might say, but I'll settle for renewed, not being a Shintoist, although I can see how one might toy with the idea of it. Once a year, as I say, I need to travel like this. Once a year at least, I like to leave home. And to just round up my 7 minutes, is it that I have?
Yes.
Have I got 3
Keep
more?
counting.
I will say this. I know that nobody is interested in what I experience. You are interested in what you experience. We might have wanted to know from Marco Polo what he'd experienced, but we can find that on Twitter nowadays. I want to know, for example, not about Borneo, but what about what Redmond Hannon has found in Borneo. You want to know about yourselves, what it feels like, perhaps, to be me. As far as I'm concerned, is that what I want to say? Yes. For a place to be worth going to, 3 things must dovetail, 3 things. Firstly, it will ideally be somewhere behind enemy lines, because that puts you on your mettle. So Canada is out. Going to Canada is just like staying at home, but colder. Canada is nice. Canadians are nice. You don't want nice when you travel. The god of travel, after all, is Hermes, god of boundaries and boundary crossings, of transition and transgression, constantly darting in and out of enemy territory. In a word, he's the god of changing places. I doubt Hermes could even spell Canada. Uganda, on the other hand, is definitely behind enemy lines, as is Cuba. But neither of them strongly tempts me as a destination because I doubt I'd find myself interesting there. That's the key. It's not a judgment on Uganda or Cuba, but on the match. It's like a conversation, really, any conversation that leaves you feeling elated. You want to be part of it so long as it makes you feel larger, richer, and more interesting than you've felt up to now. So long as it magnifies something you cherish, so long as it makes what could feel unremarkable about you or the universe remarkable, as someone you love does. To be remarkable in itself, as the Taj Mahal is, or Machu Picchu, or Angkor Wat, is not enough. It must make everything that has been ordinary about you now feel extraordinary. That's the second criterion in choosing where to go. And the third thing I look for when I travel well is hunger. Where you go should leave you feeling slightly hungry, should sharpen your appetite for life, not quench it. This is what the Rotang Pass did for me. You see, I was in alien territory, I was doing something extraordinary, and it also left me hungering for Ladakh, further up the road on the edge of the forbidden. Well, that's enough from me, isn't it, really? Thank you.
Well done. Roger.
Well, the book I'm going to read from is Palestinian Walks. Right. The book I'm going to read from is Palestinian Walks, which is subtitled Notes on a Vanishing Landscape, which was published in 2008, and which describes 7 walks that I took not far from home in the half century that the book covers. I will read from the introduction, and so it will explain what I'm trying to do in the book, and I need to say no more in the introduction. When I began hill walking in Palestine a quarter of a century ago, I was not aware that I was traveling through a vanishing landscape. For centuries, the central highland hills of Palestine, which slope on one side towards the sea and on the other towards the desert, had remained relatively unchanged. As I grew up in Ramallah, the land from my city to the northern city of Nablus might, with a small stretch of the imagination, have seemed familiar to a contemporary of Christ. Those hills were, I believe, one of the natural treasures of the world. All my life, I've lived in houses that overlook the Ramallah Hills. I've related to them like my own private backyard, whether for walks, picnics, or flower-picking expeditions. I have watched their changing colors during the day and over the seasons, as well as during an unending sequence of wars. I have always loved hill walking, whether in Palestine, the Swiss Alps, or the highlands and outlying islands of Scotland, where it was a particular joy to ramble without fear of harassment and the distracting awareness of imminent political and physical disasters. I began taking long walks in Palestine in the late 1970s. This was before many of the irreversible changes that blighted the land began to take place. The hills then were like one large nature reserve with all the unspoiled beauty and freedom unique to such areas. The 7 walks described in this book span a period of 27 years. Although each walk takes its own unique course, there are also travels through time and space. It is a journey beginning in 1978 and ending in 2007, in which I write about the region and the changes to my life and surroundings. I describe walking in the hills around Ramallah, in the wadis of the Jerusalem wilderness, and through the gorgeous ravines of the Dead Sea. Palestine has been one of the countries most visited by pilgrims and travelers over the ages. The accounts I have read do not describe a land familiar to me, but rather a land of these travelers' imaginations. Palestine has been constantly reinvented with devastating consequences to its original inhabitants, whether it was the cartographers preparing maps or travelers describing the landscape in the extensive travel literature. What mattered was not the land and its inhabitants as they actually were, but the confirmation of the viewers' or readers' religious or political beliefs. I can only hope that this book does not fall within this tradition. The Western world's confrontation with Palestine is perhaps the longest running drama in history. This was not my drama, although I suppose I'm a bit player in it. I like to think of my relationship to the land where I've always lived as immediate and not experienced through the veil of words written about it, often replete with distortions. And yet, it is in the unavoidable context of such literature that I write my own account of the land and the contemporary culture of fear and blood, crime and punishment that blot its beauty. This long-running drama has not ended. The stage, however, has relocated to the hills of the West Bank, where Israeli planners place Jewish settlements on hilltops and plan them such that they can only see other settlements which strategically dominating the valleys in which most Palestinian villages are located. It is not unusual to find the names of Arab villages on road signs deleted with black paint by overactive settlers. The Israel Exploration Society instructs its researchers to provide, quote, concrete documentation of the continuity of a historical thread that remained unbroken from the time of Joshua ben Nun until the days of the conquerors of the Negev in our generation, unquote. To achieve this, the intervening centuries and generations of the land's inhabitants have to be obliterated and denied. In the process, history, mine and that of my people, is distorted and twisted. Such attitudes fit perfectly into the long tradition of Western travelers and colonizers who simply would not see the land's Palestinian population. When they spared a glance, it was to regard the Palestinians with prejudice and derision as a distraction from the land of their imagination. So, Thackeray describes an anonymous Arab village outside of Jerusalem thus, quote, "A village of beavers or a colony of ants make habitations not unlike those dismal huts piled together on the plain here." In the course of a mere 3 decades, close to 500,000 Jewish people were settled within an area of only 5,900 square kilometers. The damage caused to the land by the infrastructural work necessary to sustain the life of such a large population with enormous amounts of concrete poured to build entire cities in hills that had remained untouched for centuries is not difficult to appreciate. I witnessed this complete transformation near where I grew up, and I write about it here. Beautiful wadis, springs, cliffs, and ancient ruins were destroyed by those who claim a superior love of the land, by trying to record how the land felt and looked before this calamity. I hope to preserve, at least in words, what has been lost forever. Thank you.
My name's Bea Rowlatt, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here waving the flag for women travellers, because they are there. Hey! And for women travel writers. And it's very interesting what you said, Robert, about the impetus and what it means to travel and how that is a homecoming. And for me, initially, it was about escape. That was the push factor. And it was an escape from domesticity, an escape from expectation on the lives of women and on motherhood and such like. And when I looked back at writers of inspiration, at women who had done the same thing, I sensed that there was a thread there that I was connecting to. My book, In Search of Mary, is an exploration of that. I followed in the footsteps of an amazing woman traveller, Mary Wollstonecraft, the 18th century Enlightenment philosopher and mother of feminism, and a real daredevil to boot, an extraordinary woman. So I wanted to explore her life and her legacy. How that winds me up in the bit that I'm about to read, I'm still not entirely sure, but travel is comprised of these moments of magic, these unforgettable things where you kind of can't quite believe your own luck, and also how did I get here? And I've chosen one of those moments. For the purposes of clarity, I just want to explain a bit of British slang. The word fanny in British slang means your female genitalia. I think for Americans it means your posterior. So, oh my God, what's she going to talk about now? Oh, you let the women out and they just, oh dear me, whatever next. William Sickin, oh no. So,
Thanks for the explanation.
So how did I wind up in a naked hot tub in California whilst exploring the legacy of an 18th century Enlightenment philosopher? Well, Harbin Hot Springs. I approach some small, hobbity-looking houses around a steaming pool with a rainbow teepee over the top. A thin, shaggy man with reflective sunglasses waves and says, "Hey, I'm Antelope." "Hello, Antelope." I do not want to be rebirthed by Antelope. I advance cautiously and look into the pool. There's a smiling woman raising from the water. She has a pretty and sensible face, like a reliable milkmaid, and extremely enormous breasts. "Hi, you must be Bea. Yes, you're Patty?" I reply to her face, talk to her face. "Well, hi, yes I am, take a shower, come on in." Oh, I gulp. She's naked. I brought a swimming costume, but I don't want to seem uptight. So I have a quick shower, and I stride nakedly forth into the warm water as if to say, I do this every other day. Okay, it's your first time, says Patty encouragingly. How can she tell? Anything you want to tell me about your body? Well, I don't really think about my body that much, but I've got 4 kids. I'm maybe a bit stressed, I say, the tension rising as I imagine being engulfed in her bosoms. Okay, let's see how you float, she says, and supporting my head, she lightly pulls me along while my body flails awkwardly. Oh, she exclaims, you're going to need a lot of floating support. I'm a special needs floater. Patty attaches 2 floats to my legs, one around each shin, and takes my head again. And this time I lift up and float into an obedient baby position. Like the diagram of an unborn baby at around 6 months gestation, my arms and legs are small floating appendages. She begins to rock me from side to side, and questions stampede into my mind as I screw my eyes shut. What if I bump into her breasts? My breasts are intimidated. Is this sexual? I don't want it to be sexual. What if I need to cough or scratch my nose? What if she breathes on me? What if she utters an ecstatic moan and I start laughing? Can she see my fanny? Is it too manicured for this environment? I bet everyone else has really bushy fannies. My fanny feels like a traitor. Is antelope in the water? I shut my eyes a fraction less fiercely, and some light gets in through my eyelashes. We're gently moving between sunny patches in the water, and I can just make out the colours of the teepee overhead. It's very amniotic. It makes me feel like a baby. It's quite powerful, the weightlessness of being in water and the weightlessness of not being able to see or hear. I start to feel like a baby. I peep out of one eye to make sure Patty's not spying on me or chanting a Native American incantation. But no, she's gazing into the distance. Close my eyes again. Soon I start to feel that Patty loves me. My mind tells me that this is absurd, but I can just tell that she really does. The movements blur and lull. I can feel that she's there. She moves me concertina-like, and I lose track of gravity. Everything is mildly floating away. There's a small panic when I think she's passed me on to antelope, and then I know I've become a baby. No, don't give me to him! Frowning baby! Don't worry, it's all right. The word caress appears uninvited. I'm being caressed and unravelled by the movement of the water. She folds and stretches me, and it goes on and on. After a possibly very long time, she sets me down the right way, tenderly placing my feet on the bottom of the pool, and she steadies me. I find my feet and then my balance, and as I adjust, my eyelids gradually begin to move apart. And a funny thing happens. Patty's smiling there right in front of me, her face close to my face. And as my eyes open, I involuntarily utter a little noise. Not a moan, I'm British for God's sake. More of a croak, a small sound of gratitude and surprise. It just bursts out of my mouth, and I'm not even embarrassed.
We're going back to Palestine for the next reading. This is a book called From the Holy Mountain, which I wrote 15 years ago, about the Christian minorities of the Middle East, which remain dotted around Turkey, Palestine, Egypt, Lebanon. Since I wrote the book, many of the communities I wrote about have disappeared. The Armenians of Aleppo have gone to Aleppo. Many Palestinian Christians have emigrated from Bethlehem and Jerusalem, and many Coptic Christians have emigrated to America. It's a ancient world dating back to the early centuries AD, and it is dying. But amid all this decline, there are these extraordinary ancient monasteries dotted around the Middle East, many dating back to the 3rd or 4th century AD. And they're filled with these sort of visionary ecstatics living in the desert. None stranger than the man I'm going to read to you about, Father Theophanes, the Gesvahu Rajanos, the guest master of Marsaba Monastery. He was a policeman in Athens who suddenly got the call to become a monk. He's now the guest master of this monastery. "Look at it," said Father Theophanes, the monastery's tall, gaunt guest master, waving a hand at the rocky gorge beneath us. "There it is, the valley of doom, the valley of dreadful judgment." Below us, the monastic buildings of Marsaba fell away in a gentle ripple of chapels, cells, and oratories, each successive layer hanging like a wasp's nest from the edge of the rock face. Opposite, the top of the cliff wall had turned an almost unnatural shade of red in the last of the evening light. The rock was pitted with caves, each formerly the cell of a Byzantine monk. All were now deserted. "It's very beautiful," I said. "Beautiful?" said Father Theophanes, rustling his robes in horror. "Beautiful? See down there at the bottom, the river. Nowadays it's just sewage from Jerusalem. But on Judgment Day, that is where the river of blood is going to flow. It's going to be full of Freemasons, whores and heretics, Protestants, schismatics, Jews and Catholics. More ouzo? Please." The monk paused a small thimbleful of spirit into a small glass. When I gulped it down, he continued with his apocalypse. "At the head of the damned will be a troop composed of all the popes of Rome, followed by their deputies, the vice-presidents of the Freemasons." Are you saying the Pope is a Freemason? A Freemason? He is the president of the Freemasons. Everyone knows this. Each morning he worships the devil in the form of a naked woman. Sounds like one of B's stories. With the head of a goat. "Actually," I said, I'm a Catholic. "Then," said Father Theophanes, "unless you convert to Orthodoxy, you too will follow your Pope down the valley through the scorching fire. We will watch you from this balcony," he added. "But of course, by then it'll be too late to save you." I smiled, but Father Theophanes was in full swing and clearly in no mood for joking. "No one can know truly what that day will be like," he said. "But some of our Orthodox fathers have had visions. Fire, terrible fire that will never end, will come from the throne of Christ, just like it does on the icons. The saints, those who are to be saved, in other words, the Orthodox Church, will fly through the air to meet Christ, but sinners and all non-Orthodox will be separated from the elect. The damned will be pushed and prodded by devils through the fire, down the valley of Josaphat, past here, exactly the route those Israeli hikers took this afternoon. Down, down to the mouth of hell." "Is that nearby?" I asked. "Certainly," said Father Theophanes, stroking his beard. "The mouth of hell will open up near the Dead Sea." "Is that in the Bible?" "Of course," he said. "Everything I'm telling you is in the Bible." Anyway, for a week he ranted and raved, and just as I was leaving, I finally plucked up my courage to ask him why. "Father Theophanes," I said, "I don't understand why you're quite so worried about the Freemasons." "Because they are the legions of the Antichrist, the stormtroopers of the whore of Babylon." "But, I thought these days Freemasons just held coffee mornings and bridge evenings and that sort of thing." "Bridge evenings," he said, pronouncing the words as if it was some sort of satanic ritual. "Probably this bridge evening also. But their main activity is to worship the devil. There are many steps," he said, nodding knowingly. "But the last, the final step, is to meet with the devil and have homosexual relations with him. After this, he makes you Pope, or sometimes President of the United States." "President of the United States? Certainly," he said. "It has been proved." "All the presidents of the United States have been Freemasons, except Kennedy. He was a Catholic, and you know what happened to him."
Hi, I'm Hugh Thomson. It's very unfair going on after Willie. I know that when the Who played Monterey, they had it in their contract that they didn't have to play after Hendrix. But I'm here to talk about a book which is finally published in India. It's taken a long struggle to get it published here. I brought it out in England some 15 years ago, Nanda Devi, and for all sorts of legal and political reasons, we were unable to publish it in India until this year. So I'm very proud to be able to bring it now to India. And I'm going to be talking in a moment about why we weren't able to publish it here for such a long time. But first I'm going to read a little bit from the opening. As all of you, of course, will know, Nanda Devi, the highest mountain in India, if you exclude Sikkim, it was a goal for many years for both British and Indian mountaineers. And for many years, no one could climb it for reasons which I'm going to describe, because it is surrounded by a ring of other mountains, which makes it very difficult to reach. So I'm just going to read a little bit from the opening, and then I'm going to describe the reasons why it is now closed off for military, quote-unquote, purposes. If mountains were just lumps of rock, there would be no point in climbing them. But they are the repository of dreams. Imagine one of the tallest mountains in the world. A high and beautiful valley curls round it like a moat, filled with the rarest of flowers and animals. Now imagine also that around this valley is a ring of Himalayan tooth-edged peaks, linked to each other by an impenetrable curtain wall of sheer cliffs, which form a protective guard for the mountain at their center. Then circle this protective wall with yet another moat and another high wall of peaks, so that there is both an inner and outer keep, like the fortifications of a medieval castle. Allow just one entrance to the sanctuary at the heart of this complex, a river gorge, a tributary of the Ganges that drains the mountain's glaciers and cuts through the inner and outer curtain walls in a chasm of such breathtaking steepness and ferocity that even the most hardened of travelers turns away from it in despair. In some ways, it is easy to imagine such a place, because literature has already pictured it many times. The idea of the sanctuary, the earthly paradise, is as old as Eden and is common to both Western and Eastern religions. More recently, Hollywood has perpetuated it as a recurring archetype, the lost world or Shangri-La, which explorers try to reach at their peril. But such a place exists in reality. It is called the Nanda Devi Sanctuary in the Himalaya between India and Tibet, and the torrent that issues from its formidable gates is one of the sources of the Ganges, perhaps the world's most revered river. The often tragic history of those who have tried to reach it shows what happens when the dream of finding a sanctuary, one of mankind's oldest and most compulsive quests, collides with solid rock. In the past, Nanda Devi has claimed many lives. And so I was very lucky in that in the year 2000, for complicated reasons, the Indian Mountaineering Federation decided that although the whole area had been closed off for so long, they would open it up for one expedition of which I could be a part. And the expedition was led by some very distinguished Indian mountaineers, Paul Kumar and John Shipton, the son of Eric Shipton, who'd first been there. So I, as rather a mountaineering groupie, I'm not a great mountaineer myself, was able to join them as the writer, so to speak. Now, what I want to mention now is why the area had been closed off for so long, why we were the only expedition to be able to go there, why no expeditions have been able to go since, and why I found it so difficult to publish this book in India. In 1962, after the Indo-China War, the CIA came up with a brilliant idea. It was an idea that Dr. Strangelove would have been proud of. And the idea was this. The idea is, look, Nanda Devi, highest mountain, right on the border with China, as in Tibet, let's plant a nuclear-powered spying device on the summit. It was an idea that should have died at death. It was an idea that should have been laughed out of court. The CIA contacted the Indian Secret Service to put this idea forward to them. So, of course, the Indian Secret Service thought about it and said, yes, yes, let's do it. It's brilliant. And so a crack team of Indian and American mountaineers were assembled. The American mountaineers were given man tan so that they could darken their skins and blend in for this so-called covert operation, which was called Operation Blue Mountain, to make it seem important. And this team set off into the heart of the Himalayas with a nuclear-powered spying device, which they managed to carry halfway up the mountain. Halfway up, winter arrived, as it sometimes does, rather like Game of Thrones, winter came early, and the mountaineers decided that what they should do, very sensibly, is leave the nuclear-powered spying device halfway up the mountain and come back next year to finish the job. They came back next year and discovered that a landslide had covered and lost a nuclear-powered spying device close to one of the tributaries of the Ganges. Clearly, there was only one thing to do in political terms, and that was a complete and total cover-up. So for many years, the Indian government managed to suppress this story completely. No one was allowed to talk about it. All the mountaineers had to sign non-disclosure agreements. They'd been paid a great deal of money, and so the secret was kept. It took decades before the first whispers of this came out. Some mountaineers talked over campfires. There were a few articles in underground magazines. And I decided that when I went, the time had come to, for the first time, publish the full story in the book, which I do, and tell the story of why this happened and the fact that this nuclear-powered spying device is still, as far as we know, covered by a landslide somewhere in the Nanda Devi sanctuary, and that is why the Indian government refuses to let anyone go into the sanctuary area. They claim it is for ecological reasons. It isn't. It is for military reasons, and they occasionally send in military teams of sappers to try to discover the device, but so far with no success. So I do think it's a scandal. I do think more should be said about it. I think it should be revived. It's currently a buried issue in more ways than one, and the time has come, and I hope the publication of this book will launch much more of a discussion and inquiry as to why the nuclear-powered spying device has not been located. But just to finish off, I will read a little bit from the end of the book, my own thoughts going there. I feel very privileged to have been allowed into the sanctuary area and to have seen it myself after what was an extraordinary journey there with some great mountaineers. So this is at the end. I'm sitting quietly in the sanctuary area. As I sat in the little meadow at the centre of the sanctuary, beneath Nanda Devi's great ramparts, I thought of the Indian mountaineer who had recently been killed, and of the young American climber, Nanda Devi Unsol, who had been named after the mountain by her mountaineering father, who was only 22 years old when she died on the mountain, and whose memorial tablet was near to where I was sitting. All around it were memorials for others who had died there as well, many of them porters. I thought of all those mountaineers who had died in pursuit of what, at the end of it, is only an idea. With the lammergeier and the birds wheeling and circling round the serrated cliff edges above, and with the beauty of the meadow around me, I thought of all those pilgrims who'd been drawn up into the mountains, and of those who had found what they were looking for, a belief in something that endures. And I remembered an old Quran of the Buddhists, the first to venerate Nanda Devi, which tells the story of an old sage instructing his pupils. When I was young, he says, I believed that a mountain was just a mountain. But then, when I began the long process to nirvana and enlightenment, I realized there was much more to a mountain, and that it was a symbol of many other things. But now that I am old and I have achieved nirvana, I realize that a mountain is, indeed, just a mountain. Thank you.
I always feel a bit of a fraud on this panel. The last travel book I brought out was a quarter of a century ago, in 1993. And the last time I was here, in desperation, I read something from my most recent book on Graham Greene, but I've used that up now. So of course, I hope every one of you buys 18 copies of it and commits every word to memory. But with nothing else to read, I thought for the first, and I hope last time in my life, I would read publicly from a piece of journalism. You all know that every travel magazine in the world, every issue, has really only one theme, the beauty and importance of the bucket list. So a few months ago, a magazine in New York City asked me to write an essay on travel, and I thought the only theme to write about was the folly of the bucket list. My spirited friend Alice was overjoyed when she and her husband Scott scored a reservation for dinner at Tsukibayashi Jiro, the hyper-exclusive 10-seat Tokyo sushi bar inside a subway station. A concierge who enjoyed a special relationship with Jiro had actually walked Alice's and Scott's request over to the restaurant 2 months in advance. And after they got off their flight from San Francisco, my friends reminded themselves that their 20-course feast would begin at 5:30 on the dot, and in keeping with house rules, they would not be allowed to wear strong perfume, collarless shirts, or sandals. But lunch with colleagues the next day ran unexpectedly late and proved unexpectedly large. And 5:30 was, of course, after midnight for their Californian stomachs. By the time they arrived, they already felt overstuffed, even as they were reminded that they had to complete their 20 courses in roughly 20 minutes. House rules again. As one dish after another arrived, Alice began, quite literally, to fear she'd throw up. Yes, they were awarded a printed souvenir menu and a snapshot with Jiro 3 weeks before President Obama ate there. But by the time they returned to their hotel, $600 poorer, sushi was perhaps no longer their favorite dish. I was still chuckling over Alice's hilarious account of her misadventure when my wife reminded me about my visit to a gorgeous Moroccan resort I'd been dreaming of ever since its opening 15 years before. Not long after I'd been shown to my private $1,400 a night villa, which came with a private pavilion, a private swimming pool, and a private fountain, the handle to my private gate clattered to the ground. Soon after, the electricity gave out across my mini fiefdom because of the private fountain, I was told. The second time this happened, at 4:16 a.m., the staff declined even to reply to my call. I get the idea of a bucket list, I really do. I was as inspired as anyone by the movie that popularized that term, in which Jack Nicholson and Morgan Freeman resolved to do everything they most wanted to do after being diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. We all need dreams of ballooning over the temples of Pagan or airboating across an alligator-infested swamp to sustain us. Bucket lists provide a clarifying sense of direction. When my mother, recently widowed, turned 67, I started saving up to take her once every year to all the places she'd been dreaming of since she was a little girl. At Angkor Wat, at Easter Island, at Syria and Jordan and St. Petersburg, she came away exhilarated. But bucket lists fly in the face of the first two laws of travel. First, that on any good trip, our expectations will be upended. And second, that most of us don't know what to look for until we see it. One reason people love Paris, I suspect, is not the Louvre or Notre Dame, but that forgotten backstreet cafe they can believe they've discovered while getting lost on their way to the Eiffel Tower. And to me, the monumental stone heads of Easter Island could never be as impressive or as surprising as the replica Easter Island heads that guard my health club in Japan. What really ravished me on the island was the sleepy Polynesian beauty of the main street, down which locals in pareos sashayed with a laid-back ease I'd never witnessed in Tahiti. The whole point of travel, for me at least, is to have my sense of possibility expanded, to see every box in which I like to put things exploded, and to be reminded that life generally has plans for us much wiser than the ones we might concoct for ourselves. One of the main things bucket lists teach us is the folly of treating places and experiences as collectibles. I have friends, not hugely wealthy, who dream of going to Dublin in hopes of seeing Bono, or flying to eastern Tibet to meditate with a sage. But Bono has surely offered far more to all of us already in his constant interviews and concerts than he could ever do when surprised by a fan in his favorite pub. And the sage, if he's the real thing, will surely tell anyone who asks that the whole point of meditation is that it can be practiced no less usefully in Jaipur. Yeah, there are worthy souls whose bucket lists involve working with the dispossessed in Haiti or building houses for the poor in the Philippines. But the fact remains that the third law of travel is that happiness is very often commotion recollected in tranquility. Alice would never have come away with such a funny and memorable story of her visit to Jiro had everything gone according to plan. Monks in both East and West, like the one Willie was reading about, have always seen the wisdom of asking yourself what you most want to do if you have very little time left. And maybe such ideas can be inspirations, so long as you never count on realizing them. I've been longing to visit Mount Athos in northern Greece ever since a school friend described his trip there 40 years ago, but I'll be no poorer if I never get there. One of the most indelible and exhilarating places I've seen in recent years was Little Rock, Arkansas, in part because I'd never dreamed of wanting to go there. And in any case, wherever you disembark, you'll soon learn that the curious and magnetic people you meet have dreams of their own, dreams of freedom and peace, and the chance to see Rajasthan or the Taj Mahal. My bucket list these days consists mostly of empty space. Thank you.
This is a little anti-colonial piece. I hope it's not too strong. This is 4 months into a journey in the Congo, Congo-Brazzaville as it used to be called, in the north. And we're staying in a village of Bamitaba, quite a violent place. And the village is called Boa. And all you need to know is the oldest man there, he's called Bobe, and he's just given me a most wonderful description of the local spirits and the psychic dangers that hover around his village. Now, the God of everything, he says, the chief spirit that will protect you, you turn to Bolo for everything. So, I'm with Marcelan, who's the Minister for Conservation of the Fauna and Flora of the Congo, and we've been together traveling through the jungle for 4 months plus, and we're friends. I thought great friends. Well, I still do. But anyway, as we leave this old man's hut on the way back to our own hut, the other side of the village, on the mud path, and it's dark, I think you ought to know, said Marcelan, that in Lingala, bolo means vagina. I laughed. So why is that funny, he said, rounding on me. I'm sorry, I said, shocked at the real venom in his voice. The happy pace of my walk involuntarily changed to a shuffle. I thought you meant that old Bobe was making a fool of me. Oh, no, you didn't, snapped Marcelan, slowing his stride to match mine. That's not why you laughed. Why the hell should old Bobe want to make a fool of you? Didn't you see how tired it made him? It's dangerous for him to talk like that. Didn't you see how afraid he was? And then you laugh. How dare you laugh at old Bobe? And anyway, he shouted, kicking a lump of mud off the path, it all makes just as much sense as your white man's superstitions. What about the fetish you all wear around your neck? Your little crosses? What about those beads you all finger in your pockets and mumble spells over? Tell me, what about your unspeakable rites? What about your cannibal symbols? Tell me, do you or do you not eat and drink the body and blood of the big white chief of your tribe once every 7 days, just as if it's a proper and reasonable thing to do? Oh, no. You've no right to laugh at us, at old Bobe, at Africans. No right at all. I apologize. And anyway, I've told you I'm not a Christian. I don't believe it. I don't wear a crucifix, and I've never said a rosary in my life. Said a rosary, mimicked Marcelan, with a yap of laughter himself. You have your little words to disguise it all, don't you? For us, you say, it's a fetish, or a juju, or a gree-gree. But for you, oh yes, it's very dignified. It's quite different. It's a rosary, is it? It's a crucifix, so that's all right. Is it? That makes everything okay. I've told you, I don't believe it. Believe it or not, my friend, it's in your head. I've been thinking about it. I've been thinking about it ever since that night with Doku. You tell me it's normal. You call it a part of your culture. And you think you're perfectly reasonable. You think you're a people of reason and science, that the daylight belongs to the white man and the night to the African. And I agree. You make motor cars and outboards and aeroplanes, and we don't. But what about your 3 gods in one? Your big Holy Ghost that can go anywhere? Your thousands of spirits with wings and with light shining straight out of their heads? But what about your evil animal with feet like a goat and a long tail that divides into 2 at the end? Tell me, why sneer at the African? How is all that superior to Bolo? What's scientific about that? And what about your other god who became a man and let himself be stuck on a piece of wood and speared so that he could save you all? What could it possibly mean? What's the sense in it? There is no sense in it. It's a matter of faith. Faith means saying goodbye to reason and science. That's what faith is. When you get faith, you throw the switches, you blow a gasket, you deliberately go soft in the head. It's more comfortable that way. Marcelan ignored me. No wonder we were frightened of the white man when he came here with his guns and killed us and talked about eating his god all day long. No wonder we thought you were cannibals. And there's another thing. Your god who never had a woman. Look, no one could be blacker than me. He shone the torch on his arm. I'm the blackest African I know, and I have the strongest need for sex of anyone I know. It's genetic. It's in the skin. I think about it all the time, all the time. If I don't have a woman every night, I get ill. I'm ill now. You should pay me double for making me risk my life for you in these forests with these people. And then you should pay me double again for making me walk all day and then sleep in a tent all alone without a woman at night. And for months on end, you white men, we don't know how you breed. You have a god born without any sex, and then he never had a woman. And what about the god's mother in those fetish statues you have everywhere? A woman who'd never had a man, with an idiot smile on her face and a baby in her arms. If that's not just plain silly, if that's not stupid, I don't know what is. A fierce drumming began suddenly, fully fledged from the far end of the village. Masterland was silent. Then, love your neighbor as yourself, he said, his torch beam waving wildly off the path and into the cactus hedges to either side of us. Love your neighbor as yourself? What hypocrites you are! His voice rose to its highest pitch, a falsetto shriek of indignation, of real temper. The dog turned and bolted. Love your neighbor? And you come here with guns and break up our families and sell us into slavery, husbands and wives and little children. It made no odds to you. You white men burned all the Jews just in a year or two, a mere 6 million. You say that was a great crime, and so it was. But what about us? What about our Holocaust? From the Congo alone, you sold 13 million of us into slavery. What about that? It went on for centuries. For centuries, no man knew if he'd lived to see his children grow up, to see his sons learn to hunt, to make new gardens with his sons. Tell me, will you, what had we done to deserve it? You white men say sorcery is a great evil, and so it may be. But tell me sometime, what kind of God let you torture us like that?
Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Dessaix, Roger Shehadeh, B. Rowlett, Hugh Thomson, Pico Iyer, and Redmond O'Hanlon. We have a book to launch. Our sponsor, we wouldn't be here without our sponsors. So we've got Christmas early, or Diwali, I don't know which. Here we go. So we have to open this up. This is Ford Mustang's Book of Indian Pictures. I've been asked to read a little sentence. Yeah, I think it's